Hello. I want to talk about digging holes and how it's specifically a scientific problem. We need to start questioning science, and I need to clarify that because right now people will be going, here's another person who is bagging science. Science is all about knowing, it's about the intellect, but it's not actually designed to provide the scientist with wisdom and a higher intelligence and align those two things. Because if it did, then there'd be more humility in science. And from what I see now with respect to science, it is in danger of becoming a dogma. We have people who are in different camps with respect to what methods of dog training that they're using. Never mind that the dog training industry isn't regulated, and it's not going to be regulation or laws that actually shift thought and unite people and help to shift thought. It's actually shifting our mindset to use the science that we have and say, okay, we know what we know. We need to just take a step back and we need to look at science and apply a higher level intelligence that provides us with wisdom and humility. To outline the wisdom part of the digging of holes, I saw a post on the Bondi Vet Facebook page, and it was basically an ad to sell what they call a calming bed. Now we've got a veterinarian with a stethoscope and looking very professional, very scientific, but this person is talking about a big statement saying, did you know that over 40% of dogs suffer from anxiety? But it's an advertisement to sell a bed, so you're not going to have information telling you that it's a really good idea that you don't rely just on a bed to address a very complex issue, a medical issue, and a mental health issue that your dog might have. It doesn't actually tell you why this is happening, the contributing factors, the genetic component, the lives that dogs are living now, being shoehorned into synthetic lifestyles, into a kind of Stockholm syndrome. And we're not just doing that with dogs, we're doing that with every single animal species. And so there wasn't even a mention of actually seeking out help from your veterinarian to rule out any medical causes and have a general behaviour screen. So this is a really big hole that Bondi Vet social media has really dug for themselves and dug for millions of humans that have seen that post and have a dog in their life, but don't even understand how to read their dog's body language and don't even know what dogs need as a species, those basic things, and don't even understand that the way that we're forcing dogs to live isn't normal. I also recently attended and presented at an online event, and the theme was for the love of science. And so that's really nice, but I did see that there was the same ideas were being repackaged in different ways. And so there was no aligning of a higher intelligence, and there's no aligning of a wisdom or a raising of consciousness. There were a couple of really wonderful glimmers that I did see, but what I saw was another big hole being dug, because that generation of young people that are wanting to be dog trainers, and of course there's a lot of issues with the dog training industry. Laws cannot cannot shift our thought. Only we can actively and consciously shift our thought in the way we see other living species: dogs, cats, horses, birds, sheep, cattle, every animal species. But I noticed that also some of the scientists who were veterinarians as well, they were talking about different studies, and a lot of these studies were talking about changing or conditioning an animal's behaviour through pain via an electric shock. But there's no mention about the ethical or moral implications of these studies. It was just glossed over. That's a scientific study, but it needs to be questioned. we need to question the amount of studies and the continuing studies that are being done in the name of science that are putting animals in positions of conflict, distress, anxiety, pain, and they're forced to endure that. They have no choice because they're laboratory animals. And that extends not just to rats, mice, it also extends up to dogs and cats as well. I want to talk about a recent horrific event that happened. Human lives were lost, but 5,867 animals also perished on that boat, on that ex-human cruise ship that forced all of those animals onto that ship to go to a destination in Japan to be slaughtered. Now, of course, there were veterinarians, young veterinarian on that boat, on that ship. But this is the other big hole that we're digging for ourselves. But let's think about those 5,867 cattle, those cows, those living, breathing, sentient animals that were frightened, that were absolutely terrified, that were crammed on that ship, that were forced on that ship. Before that ship capsized in that typhoon, those animals would have had dislocated hips, broken bones, and it would have taken more than several minutes for those animals to finally perish by drowning. So that's the big hole, the huge quarry that has been dug by science when we're talking about intensively farmed animals. But it's not just on the intensively farmed animal side. There's also a forced impregnation of dogs. And I recently ran into a lovely lady, wonderful to work with, and she works with a veterinary specialist in reproduction. And her words were, it was a crazy busy time for reproduction. So this is the forcible impregnation of dogs that are then going to have an elective caesarean to remove the puppies, which are going to be sold for a very heavy price tag. This is a multi-million-dollar industry. Another multi-million-dollar industry in the veterinary industry is corrective surgeries for brachycephalic dogs. There's a glimmer of hope there with that particular specialist who actually presented a petition, a signed petition from veterinarians to the breeders, specifically asking them and wanting to work with them to please reduce the breeding of brachycephalic breeds, simply because of the detrimental and absolutely frightening physical impediments that these animals face just in their daily lives because of their exaggerated physical characteristics. So there's a glimmer of hope there, which is wonderful. There's also a glimmer of hope for the organisation that I'm Queensland representative of, the APDT. And so we had recently a presentation of a number of different topics, but at the last minute one of the veterinarians decided to change her topic because it was deemed too controversial, and it was simply talking about how veterinarians and dog trainers should be working together. The real controversy is that over 3.3 million dogs in the US every year are surrendered to shelters, and over 670,000 of those dogs are going to be euthanized, and a large proportion of those are going to be because they were bred by humans who could care less about the welfare of the dog in relation to the price tag of the puppy that they're going to be getting, the price tag that they'll be able to put on that puppy, and the monetary value that they think outweighs the life of that living, breathing, sentient animal that has been basically bred into existence for no other purpose than to fulfil a human desire, a human want, the human demand. $17 million mink were recently culled and that was due to a mutation in the coronavirus. Now these 17 million mink are living, breathing, sentient animals that feel physical and emotional pain, and this is how they're housed. But they were killed, but they call it culled, they were killed because of fears of the coronavirus mutating and infecting these animals. But these animals were going to be slaughtered anyway for their fur. How big a hole is that when we're housing millions and millions and millions of animals in cages because science has shown that we can factory farm them so very, very well and get the most benefit out of a carcass. Interestingly, some scientists are now calling for a ban on mink production, but it's not for the reason that you might think. It's horrific, it's torturous, it's cruel, it's barbaric. It's because, and I quote, it impedes our response and recovery from the pandemic, end quote. Now let's actually consider how the coronavirus pandemic actually began in the first place. If that isn't an example of how big a hole we are digging for ourselves with respect to science and not using our knowing and our intellect and aligning that with a higher intelligence, with wisdom and humility, then maybe this might convince you. Chinese scientists have put human brain genes in monkeys, and yes, they may be smarter. This was the first attempt to understand the evolution of human cognition using a transgenic monkey model. What an arrogant way to word a title that is using another living species as a guinea pig, as an experimental model, to live a life that is short, painful, emotionally terrifying. This animal and these animals, every laboratory animal that is being tested on right now as I'm speaking, is a living, breathing, sentient animal that feels physical and emotional pain. Now, never mind the words Chinese. It's not a Chinese problem, it's not a European problem, or an American problem, or an Australian problem. It's a human problem. Scientists are humans. And if we continue to allow science to go unchecked and made unaccountable for what it is purportedly doing in the name of advancement technologically, then it's going to turn, we are going to turn science into nothing more than dogma very, very soon. So it's so critical whether you have a dog in your life, you're a human that has a dog in your life, you're a veterinarian, you're a dog trainer, you're a dog breeder. All it takes is for you to shift your thought and raise your consciousness. Stop seeing that puppy as a price tag. Look at how many times you're breeding your dogs. Look at how much information you understand about your dog as a species and what you're not providing your dog as a species, and how you're forcing your dog to live some alien life in some kind of Stockholm syndrome that is just not normal. Now, 3.3 million dogs just in the US alone are being surrendered to shelters, and over 670,000 of those dogs are going to be euthanised. That's a product of the science of dog breeding, the science of being able to factory farm animals. There's no humility or wisdom in that. All it takes is for just one person to shift the way they think and simply raise their consciousness. We'll talk again soon.